We are being recorded via Zoom and also via WinCam and are being broadcast, I believe, live out to our thousands and thousands of fans out there in Winchester. If you need to contact the planning board at any time, you can email us at planningboard@winchester.us. And that email goes to every member of the planning board, including our town planner, Brian Zakelli. So why don't we do a roll call vote and bring this meeting to order. Sally Dale.
Present.
I-Ching Scott.
Here.
Nick Rosettos.
Here.
And Diab Jarius is here as well. So we are now open. Today's business is this is kind of a special planning board meeting for the first hour and a half. We are going to once more be discussing the future of North Main Street revitalization with Foreman Place. And then at 8:30, we are going to talk about the upcoming special town meeting article on the development of affordable housing at the Waterfield lot. And we will be joined at that time by Rich Mucci, the chair of the select board. So I believe, Michael and John, this is once more your show.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Diab. Brian, I assume I can share my screen okay? Yeah. All right. Let's see. There we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. Well, nice to see everybody again. And this is our third get together, technically intake meeting to sort of talk about goals and visions for the North Main Street corridor. And the last time we sort of divided the meeting into three components. We looked at a series of street sections up and down the corridor and compared that with views, and then followed that up with a series of slides that looked sort of, it was like a thematic tour of key points that we identified, focal points along the corridor, talking about, various issues from building relationship to the street to issues of scale and architectural character, curb cuts, and all those things that impact both the right of way and various parcels along it. And then we sort of started a conversation about the series of questions that Foreman Place generated. And we got part of the way through that, and then collected your comments during the course of the week following that. And so I think that to me seemed, John and I sort of put together an agenda tonight that again has a lot of content, but I always want to make sure that we leave enough time for just open conversation. So at the end, but also I guess I'm going to encourage again everybody to just interject along the way, which seems to work well with this group. So that's great. So let's see. I'm just going to jump right in here. So this is sort of a loose agenda for tonight. We'll review the written comments that we got from board members to the questions, and sort of I've highlighted a number of key points that talk about, in some cases, there's a pretty nice consensus on, thoughts about the public realm and parcel development in the future. And then there's other places where there are some contrasting views, which I think raise some very interesting points. So we'll focus on those as well. And then that'll lead us, I think, nicely into a conversation about a few of the variables. One that came up in comments received was about density, and Sally, you sent along some diagrams about density, visualizations of that, so we can use that as a go by. I don't know if you sent that to other folks on the board. No?
Okay, no, it'd be great to see those.
Yeah, so we've got that.
I just sent everything to Brian as instructed.
All right.
Because we have this open meeting law stuff.
Okay, great. So I've got those into the mix here, and we can talk about that. And then Nick, you had some comments about character and style, and we can maybe use that as just a sort of almost an introductory conversation about design guidelines a little bit, even though I think that might be biting off a little bit more.
Yeah, that might be a bit, that was sort of meant to be
meditation on form and history. I had put that together kind of outside the context of your questions, but
Okay.
I thought it would be something to think about.
Yeah, well,
The design, the actual pictures and some drawings that actually seem to be able to give us a lot of, use the square shape, but have them be, a design that's more traditional, as an example of maybe, one building as part of a eclectic mix.
Okay. Well, as I think I just said, I think it'd be great to just touch on that, but I don't feel like we're really at that stage of the conversation yet. Maybe that happens after, as we get farther into the summer, assuming we carry on here. And then we've got a nice graphic study to sort of conclude with that John sort of spearheaded, which was a plan study and some model development of a couple of concepts of how you might evolve the right-of-way for a particular area along a corridor that we thought was a good sort of case study starting point. So we'll look at that too. And then I want to make sure we save time at the very end for just making sure we're on the same page about the approach to the community meeting. So that is it in a nutshell. Here again are the questions that we sent off and received comments back from you guys. Thank you for those. And I think what we'll just do is we'll just run through these sort of one at a time. And again, I've sort of highlighted some key points here. I'm going to collapse my collection of people's faces here so I can do some reading. So, I mean, the first question was a fundamental one, again, about the idea of the fact that there are two zones now. There's an overlay that can also impact things. And going forward, is the two-zone construct a positive thing, or could it possibly be addressed with one zone? And I think it's interesting to look there, at some of the comments. And what I've done is I've sort of taken snippets from the responses that we received. And some folks felt that two different zones with more retail and commercial closer to the downtown was a logical approach. I think that was a pretty common feeling about the corridor, with the more residential density happening towards the north. I thought there was a really interesting comment about the natural divide along the corridor might actually be at Clark Street. And so I've added these two dashed black lines to the map there. And because I know that I, for one, certainly came into the project having looked through the MAPC work and all that, feeling like clearly it was Swanton Street that was the divider. And partly that was because that's the separation between the GBD 2 and 3. But the suggestion that Clark Street might actually be the divider, I think, is right on in many respects, because it is the beginning of the residential neighborhood on the west side, everything north of Clark Street. And it is essentially where the style of commercial strip development is happening to the south from there. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it in a slightly different way. Other folks made comments about micro zones that we talked about a little bit before, but wanting to make sure there's a gradation and character. But that it was probably, and I thought this was an interesting comment, probably okay to get rid of zones 1 and 2 and start with a clean slate. So open for more conversation on that. I think as we begin to look at the criteria a little bit more, it can hopefully become clearer which approach would be logical to pursue. And we can also talk about that with the community as well.
Can I interject here
Please.
A little bit? I'm sorry, I didn't turn in my comments, but I think that the two zones possibly could be between east and west also. Just the depths of the sites between the east side would be much deeper, and also separating it from the residential zone with that sort of drop in grade is different than the shallower sites of the west side, and really abutting very tight residential character.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you. Anybody else want to throw in a comment on the zone debate. We'll circle back to it. Thanks, I-Ching, for that. So as far as the issue of use versus character, I mean, I think clearly folks sort of said this is not really an either or question. Sally, you sent a couple of images of some examples of the types of establishments that one might think is not conducive to creating the corridor aesthetic that you're looking for, but saying, here's some examples that are of both a McDonald's on the left in Freeport and a gas station that has some architectural detail both on the building and the canopy over the pumps, has some landscaping buffer in the front, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, so this raises the question, how do you react to the fact that does this level of architectural detail and ideas about site design, does this actually solve the problem of certain uses? Because I think I would argue that there's still the vehicle-centric aspect of, a gas station, for example, or an auto repair store, is going to inherently challenge the pedestrian environment with the number of curb cuts and the activity of vehicular movements, et cetera. So the question of whether it can be sort of dressed up and dealt with in site is I think, a good fundamental thing that we can explore further. But everybody, I think, agreed that the character and functionality of streetscape is critical. This was an interesting comment. Use limitations are important, but flexibility to ensure spaces are occupied. So I think I agree with this comment in that I think it is important to think about certain uses that you want to control, but at the same time, you don't want to be overly prohibitive in the sense that it's super important for the vibrancy of the corridor to have active leases. So even if some of them may not be, whatever. So that's another sort of way to think about it that I thought was kind of interesting, a good comment. And then lastly, this sort of idea of consistency from north to south. Some uses which would preferentially be located on the south and east of the corridor. And then the other comment saying the scale were lower towards the northern part, that would lend to less intensive uses there. So I think there is a feeling that there should be a large amount of consistency from north to south, but that there clearly are locations where it would be good to kind of have some boundaries on the type of development. So those are just some comments that you all submitted, and I thought they were good to look at. I'm just going to keep moving along here because I know we want to make sure we get through to the fun stuff as well. Not that this isn't fun. So the second question was about the right-of-way versus parcels and the importance of each. And again, I think it was clearly this idea of a balance, and both are important. The sentiment again expressed that development of the public realm should really incentivize private investment on the lots. That all makes perfect sense. And the last comment, that the feel of the corridor, is determined by how buildings relate to it. I think that's what we talked about last time, and I think that I agree wholeheartedly with that sort of sentiment. The last comment is interesting, talking about, I think this is yours, Sally, revision for the corridor is based on quality materials and continuity of streetscape design, design standards for the public realm, as well as a form-based code for new development on the parcels. So again, many mechanisms and to think about how they are applied and whether you want to actually get into a full form-based code, which can be a daunting undertaking, or some kind of a hybridized version. Here comes Kurt, I think. That's probably where we'll be going next, I'm imagining, and sort of beginning to think about those variables. The budding properties thing was very interesting. I have a couple examples of here, some of the side streets and how they transition to to the North Main. I think in general, people said, boy, we really need to make sure we respect the abutting properties to the rear of these parcels that line North Main. Intensive development should occur away from the residential areas, all things that we've talked about before that make a lot of sense. These last two comments I thought were particularly thoughtful. In fact, I think they maybe were yours, Kurt, you got here just in time, which was that we really should, this is a really important topic to get public input on, particularly for folks who live, adjacent to the corridor. But this last thought, increased density along a main corridor such as North Main is appropriate regardless of what the abutting properties to the rear look like. And that it should be zoning should be able to, in a sense, be sensitive to controlling impacts, whether that's traffic or shadows or other challenges that appear. And so I really prescribe personally to this approach. I totally hear the sensitivity about the residential areas, and we'll look at this in a couple of different ways graphically as we move into the presentation. But I think it's intriguing to think that, well, first that you might be able to have one zone, but that you're within that, you're really addressing these abutting properties and making sure that you're dealing like with the residential zone versus open space zone, et cetera, et cetera. So really interesting sort of contrasting comments in this particular section, but they could also work together, I think. So just a couple more here in this section. And again, please feel free to interject if you want to take a break from listening to me talk. So the question of standards and guidelines, again, should they be separate from the bylaws? I thought a really valid point, which I think Diab you made in our last get together about it's easier to imagine them evolving as they might want to if they were outside of the bylaw rather than having to go through the whole town meeting revision process. But others sort of were feeling like they should be incorporated into the bylaws and that perhaps is the only way that they really would have teeth. There's also a comment about, if we can get the design standards integrated, that more can be done as of right, and that would streamline development and make things more predictable for the development community. And that was seen as a positive thing. But there remains this concern that if guidelines or standards are not within the bylaw, that developers will feel like they don't adhere to them. I don't personally believe that that's the case. I think that it can be structured so that the right processes is put in place. You have, whether it's something like a design review board, and the board makes a recommendation to the planning board, who makes the ultimate decision based on how the proponent is responding to the criteria that are in the guidelines or standards. So anyway, I feel like it can successfully be done either way, in or out, or as a separate document. And so I think we can continue to sort of explore that.
Hey, Diab, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say we kind of went through this with legal counsel a couple of months ago when we were dealing with a special permit for a property down in the CBD. And one of the questions was, how do design standards relate to the wording in the actual zoning? And it was, I think, pretty well stated that they are equivalent, except where the zoning bylaws have more explicit language in terms of dimensions and uses, but that they are both pretty much on the same page in terms of their legal as requirements.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, I actually think of the distinction as being design standards are in the bylaw and they're prescriptive and you have to follow them to the letter, and design guidelines are more guidelines that someone is making a little bit of an interpretation as to whether or not you're following the spirit of them. So I think of standards as being much more definitive, and that's where kind of a form-based or a hybrid form-based approach to the zoning bylaw allows you to get some of the graphic qualities of you might find in design guidelines into the bylaw, and then they're in there as a must or a shall, as someone else commented on.
Diab, I was going to add to that too, though. I mean, obviously I remember that experience, and I think the feeling I had I think there was that it felt like some of the design guidelines were perhaps like somewhat more subjective on how you interpreted them, whereas it seemed like some of the zoning bylaws were very clear and like quantitative and measurable, and so it almost felt like those always prevailed, whereas the design guidelines were a little bit subject to interpretation. And so that's why, like, in my view, like if you can figure out how to make it clear, defined, measurable, and objective, and all encompassing, it would make our lives easier.
Yeah, I agree. When I look at some of the things that are actually in the zoning, there are still subjective elements to that, which I don't know the zoning has subjective elements. It has some very objective elements, but it also has some subjective elements. How does it fit within the character? That's all a subjective decision. So certainly some clarity. If there is a way of making it clearer, that would be great. So I'm really interested to see, Michael and John, what you come up with.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it would seem that standards being the stronger term, that standards and another approach by permit, both of those approaches tend to give more control to a board that is trying to promote certain standards. So if we're unable to get standards, then we might compensate by having more things being by permit, through which we might exert influence on the final outcome. But again, it's just a thought that how do we get the vision to become a reality when a lot of times the guidelines are kind of not really well understood, and sometimes a lot of times the end product doesn't reflect those guidelines.
Yeah, I'll just add that anything that requires a judgment call or potentially is something that can be addressed with sort of an opening section of a district bylaw, where you have the sort of goals and objectives section of that. I mean, there's this is what this district is trying to achieve. And so anybody who has to make any kind of judgment just needs to have a set of criteria or goals that they can hang their hat on. So that's, when we're not doing something that's prescriptive and it's saying you have to be 15 feet back from here, then there needs to be something that someone can hang their hat on, essentially. So. Mm-hmm. All right, just a couple more here, and then we'll shift gears a little bit. In retrospect, I sort of feel like I was glad that we asked this question, but and I think a lot of people sort of alluded to, well, they're all important, and if I must prioritize, then here's what I'm doing, kind of thing. But I did think it was interesting that the building siding and frontage did end up at number 1 and number 2 in everybody's responses, and interestingly enough, it was number 1 on my bullet point list as well. So I hope I didn't sort of set the table for that too much. But where something like architectural character kind of bounced around, everywhere from number 1 to number 5. So, but I think we all would agree that all these criteria are critical to address. It's but and I have this little discussion point box at the bottom here about height to setback relationship, because this came up in some comments, and how one deals with the corridor frontage versus the frontage on a rear abutting property. And I just wanted to say, it's not obviously, and maybe this is stating the obvious, but it's not all about setbacks. Obviously, there's other mechanisms like step backs on the upper floors, and how the zone between the building and the property line is dealt with landscaping and visual buffers, fencing, walls, etc. So I just think there are a lot of mechanisms to deal with here. Variables that can be tweaked, depending on what the abutting property use is or district use is. I thought it was an interesting comment that a few people made, and we tend to spend a lot of time focusing on how these buildings are addressing the corridor and defining the right of way and what the proportions and scale of that all feels like, and I think we all know that the back is equally is important, particularly in the residential
frontage.
areas. Frontage, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How does that compare to? How is that different from architectural character?
Frontage, the way I think of that, Nick, is it's the percentage of definition that a building has along the front property line. So how much of the front property line has a building on it or on the setback line. So like if you were in an urban condition, you might be wanting, 75, 85% frontage coverage. And if you're in a more suburban location, you might be less, might be 50% or less or whatever. But it all
It helps
ties.
define the street. Then it seems
Yes,
it helps
exactly
define it.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, you got it.
And it helps define the attitude to the street wall of buildings, so to speak, and,
Sure.
and how it's shaped. Yeah.
All right.
So one of the things that did you see the presentation last week where Anthony Marino showed a building, and it wasn't quite angled to the curve of the actual sidewalk and the street, and I'm wondering if is that what you're talking about? It was kind of kitty corner to the lines of the sidewalk.
Well, I mean, yeah, we certainly talked about that with this building that my cursor is pointing at now here, the office building to the north here, how the geometry of that is not on the geometry of North Main, and how it then sort of expanded and got the parking in front, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think we're talking about being at the setback line and actually defining a sidewalk edge or a landscaped edge in front of a sidewalk and making a street wall, as John said.
Right.
So, yeah. So lastly, the sort of comments on housing, which were very interesting, and I think this sort of kicks us into a next discussion about density and some other aspects in an area like this. And a lot of people felt that the corridor was the best option for adding mixed income, multifamily, affordable housing, et cetera. In Winchester, I think there were some other comments saying that they wanted to make sure that we didn't end up with it all being too concentrated here, which I thought was a valid comment. And there are plenty of ways to deal with that. People wanted to make sure that there was a reasonable mix of types of housing and uses, which I think would be healthy for the corridor. People felt positively about development incentives for that. So the comments also talked about affordable goals, and they ranged from encourage as much affordable housing as possible to potentially doing an analysis of how much development or residential development the corridor could reasonably sustain, and then taking a percentage of that, and that it allows you to match or get closer to the goal that you're trying to get to. There was a comment made about how you're sort of slipping away a little bit from the 10% threshold, and so I think this last comment here is talking about approximately 20% might be an appropriate amount for deeded affordable, and that could sort of begin to build back towards that 10% threshold. But so lots of good comments here, but I think people generally are on the same page that this is a good location, and it should be sort of robust as appropriate. And then in hand with that is the issue of density. And it was nice that people actually threw out numbers, a range, which I thought was nice to see. Everything from 12 to 18 to another one that said 20 to 25 as a good baseline, and that you could increase from there with density incentives, but that needed to be balanced with making sure that as density increased, that you were providing sufficient green space and contributions to public infrastructure, et cetera. So I think was very thoughtful comment, and I think this all sort of translates. So I was going to then share with you Sally's diagram here on density, which is sort of a diagram showing what different unit counts per acre looks like. We're all obviously familiar with the single family, although the single families often are not on an acre; they're often on a quarter acre, and so maybe that 6 units per acre, which is about a 7,000 square foot lot, is probably not atypical of what you find in this area, I would think. And then as you move into the 18 units per acre and higher, you're beginning to introduce other prototypes like townhouses and other multifamily constructs, elevator buildings, podium buildings, et cetera. So I assume, I'm going to circulate a PDF copy of this whole presentation afterwards, and you guys can spend more time talking about this. So I thought that was very helpful, Sally. Thanks for sending that along as a visualization. But so I've sort of carried on with that a little bit, and we've done a lot of work in TOD, transit-oriented development sites, and there's endless places you can look for metrics. And I had this small aerial at the bottom of the screen here, which shows what a half-mile distance from the commuter rail station is, and it essentially gets you to the Burger King. So people generally think of the half-mile radius as the sort of TOD radius, and it's interesting that gets you to really sort of the center point of that southern section of the corridor, particularly if you're thinking of the southern section as going from Clark down to the supermarket area. So I think you could argue, that this southern section here, could be considered ripe for these types of densities. And if you look at the chart on the right, you can see a suburban town center, commuter town, which I think is probably the closest to what you guys would be defined as. If you're within the TOD range for rail, you're looking at 30 units per acre is a common goal. If it's just bus, 15 units per acre, and then sort of combining that with this, summary over on the left here, which is from Pallet, which is about sort of resiliency and sustainable design in communities. You can see here rail service in more of a center location can get to be as much as 40 units per acre. The other number is hectares, so we'll ignore that. And then in the bus service areas, you're looking at maybe 20, 25 units per acre. So I think you can find metrics absolutely everywhere, but at least if maybe for the southern section of the corridor, I think you could make a valid argument that something in the 20 to 30 or 35 even range is not, not inappropriate. So, and then I had this one more thing which I came across, which I thought you guys might find interesting. I found it fascinating. It was a very small, short article in the APA journal, and I don't know, Brian, maybe you saw that, but this was back in March, and it was just this ideas about how to manipulate zoning to help solve for this missing middle housing product. And it's based on these red bullet points here that say on 70% of land in the United States, it's illegal to build anything but single family. And then these next 3 bullet points, which say, 1/3 of American households are made up of a single individual. By 2025, up to 85% of households will not include children. And then by 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65. So you can see those, predictions are really talking about the types of housing that needs to be incorporated into communities in general. And one strategy for that, well, there's a few in these bullet points down here, but the idea of reducing minimum lot size is an intriguing one, and because it could disincentivize builders from feeling like they need to aggregate lots together in order to create multi-unit buildings, even small unit buildings, multi-unit buildings. So it suggests that you, instead of tying density to lot size, you could tie it to lot width Or another really interesting idea just below this is they have these ideas. In Portland, Oregon has this, an average unit size ordinance, which says that you're allowed to increase density if you have a smaller average unit size, which when you think about it, that makes a ton of sense. Because it doesn't really change, the volume of what you're producing, but provides a lot more opportunities. So Portland, for example, allows 4 units on a 5,000 square foot lot divided between main building and attached dwelling units, and you can bump that up to as much as 5 or 6 units if half of those are affordable. So I mean, it's interesting to think about. Taking the single family zoning and all the areas in your town that are zoned single family. And so jumping down here, it says if more than 20% of your town is zoned single family, consider changing to adopt this sort of more unit, smaller size concept everywhere. So it's not just happening in a concentrated area, but it sort of disperses it out and it becomes less impactful sort of town-wide. And there's some great examples of this. If you actually look at your zoning, and I just did a super quick takeoff. I brought this into AutoCAD and just did a takeoff of the sort of beige area here, which is the residential district A, and the residential district B, which is sort of the slightly browner shade here. And those 2 areas alone, just in a super quick takeoff, are about 60% of the land area of your town. And in those zones, you cannot do anything but single family, really. You can't do 2-family or any of the larger constructs. So just something to think about, and particularly often in thinking about it in the sort of transition zones from like a commercial corridor to residential districts. But I know that can be a very sensitive subject to discuss. I wanted to just show you this image of a home that's really near where I live in Newton Center. And it's a 4-unit building. It has two front entrances facing the street. It has 2, thoughtfully designed entrances at the side. And this is a 4-unit building for all intents and purposes, it appears like a large single family home. So that's a kind of a construct that I think a lot of communities are moving towards allowing as a way to begin to address some of these issues.
Yeah, this is really helpful, and particularly the where you talk about the creative zoning that was used in was it Portland? I'd like to hear more about that as we move forward. Those sort of creative approaches.
Okay, great. I'm just about winding down here, and I'm going to toss it to John, but I think I've got a couple more quick ones here. And I don't want to dwell on this, but this I think is the kind of thing that we could look at sort of moving forward. This is an example of a hybrid form-based code that we did for Meriden, Connecticut a number of years ago. And you can see here, there was a new Amtrak station being built in the downtown of Meriden. And they really wanted to deal with some Section 8 housing. There was a very specific thing they were wanting to deal with. Getting rid of the segregated housing and really having mixed income dwellings. So we were really incentivizing mixed income dwellings within this TOD radius and allowing 50 units per acre, as opposed to you can do 25 if it's just multifamily and it doesn't meet the criteria of providing various types of affordable housing. So these kinds of metrics can be built in to incentivize anything that you want in a particular area. And you can see here, I just also highlighted this idea about street walls, and in different districts, different sub-districts have different qualities to them, like a civic district where you have grand buildings sort of sitting off the street. You want to have a different quality to how the street wall is made. And so you have different requirements for frontage, coverage, and in other areas where you want to make sure that buildings are sited on the corner of maybe a primary and secondary street. I think we talked about that a little bit before, but these are the kinds of metrics that I think that we can work to incorporate. And then I think,
hey, Diab, did you have a question?
Yeah,
sorry.
So that was 10 years ago. Has it worked?
It has actually, and we have some pictures of that, which I think we actually may have shared in our introductory meeting for you with you guys.
That's cool.
There
Just-
was, yeah. No, there was right on this Colony Street, which is the main quarter across from the train station. They've gotten, you know, that type of density and buildings sited right on the street what is sort of a historic area. And it really has sort of proven out, I think, which is kind of exciting to see. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Thanks.
sure. I'm sorry, I'm got people
It's-
minimized here, so I'm not seeing
That's okay. That's
the
okay.
hands.
Okay.
So thanks, John, for
I'll keep an eye.
tracking those. All right, let's see. So this, I think, Nick, is based on your comments, and you had some thoughts like having certain motifs that run through structures can have a powerful unifying effect. And I think our initial reaction to that was, you know, this is it's all about the question of character versus style, which I think, John, you talked a little bit about last time. I think, you know, this is where design guidelines really come into play. And, you know, we actually recently have done design guidelines for 2 major projects in areas in Newton, and, you know, looking at things on a larger scale, and then at a block scale, and then at the building scale. And this is where, you know, all of these components from facade articulation and height and massing components to roofscape design, to what's the quality of the ground level design and transparency of storefronts, et cetera, all those components sort of come into play. And that can also be sort of folded into the bylaw as well. But in this case, they are guidelines that are associated with, they were adopted by the city council as part of the council order. And the proponent in both cases has to come back through the town staff and have what's called consistency hearings to show that their design as it's evolving, both from a site plan point of view and from an architectural point of view, is adhering to these criteria that the city wants to see, which have been laid out from the get-go. So it's a very formal process that's set up, and if they're not consistent, they have to go back and resubmit the design. They do it at the schematic design level, the design development level, and then the final version at the contract documents when they're trying to pull a building permit is when they get signed off, and ultimately the building inspector has to approve it. So it's a good process. All right. I'm sorry, I sort of blew by your thoughts there. Nick, do you want to add any other?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm looking forward to, as we move forward, to understanding character versus style and what that all means, and all of that. I'm very excited to move forward on that. And you know, I think it'll be a fun activity.
Okay, Dieb, are you up? A hand up again there?
Yeah, my hand's up again. I had 2 comments, one based on earlier slides, and just the last slide you put up about the formal process in Newton kind of raised my concerns about getting in the way of by right development. And I understand that it seems like it could be an onerous process, and I don't know what it's turned out to be in Newton. I know that, so that's just my concern is how we make sure that we can move things through.
Yeah.
The other point I wanted to make about an earlier comment about, for instance, the number, the percent of the population is going to be older than 65 in 2030. One of the things I'm worried about is that if we design buildings we need to design buildings that will work over 20 or 30 years. So that, yes, there is this baby boomer bump that's going to come through, but then those people are gone, right? At some point they all die, and that's just life. And so you need to have buildings they're now built, but they still have to be flexible enough to accommodate the needs of the next wave. And so this is one of the things that I don't know how you incorporate that, but it's something that I'm worried about us having buildings that in 20 years people will look at and say, we can't use these anymore. So
Yeah, well, I'll respond to that and just say that if you think about it, it's actually easier to consolidate units than it is I think, to subdivide them because of all the bones that are required in all them. But the goal is to have the whole spectrum of unit typologies, I think, obviously. So, sorry, someone else was going to comment.
No, I was just going to say that when you had mentioned some statistics about an increasing number of single occupant residents. I mean, baby boomers often are two resident, and they tend to require smaller square footages. I don't know, but that may then transition into whatever the next. I mean, it's obviously tough to predict, but those units might morph into places where the single individuals of the future are going to live. You know, I don't know.
Yep. Sally?
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to say, and this is going about the length of your presentation, is in our zoning bylaws, we speak about density in terms of floor area ratio, and you speak of it in terms of units per acre. And as I was doing that research to find those graphics so that I could understand, just have a number that I could hang my hat on in any way, I found that the units per acre explanation was much easier to understand, and that in fact, when you do floor area ratio, it doesn't allow more density if you require smaller unit size.
Right.
And the end result of that was that we got very large unit sizes in the first major building to come into the most recently rezoned district in town. And so I favor the notion of units per acre, or what, so I favor that, I think. And I definitely favor the notion of incentivizing density by requiring smaller unit sizes.
Yeah, good. I mean, a lot of communities are just totally abandoning FAR altogether and just relying on other volumetric, constraints to, height and setbacks and lot coverage and all those things to play that role. So you almost don't need it if you have those other things fine-tuned. So, all right, let's just get this last little section on the table here, and then we'll hopefully have another half an hour to kind of just have an open discussion. But John, this is the sort of building on your zone analysis. Do you want to run from here, or do you
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll try and do this quickly in 15 minutes. So if you look at this, if you remember, Michael and I, as we walked the corridor, we kind of came up with this way of thinking about different zones along the way. Not that they're definitive, not that they don't overlap, but this is our way of taking in where were we in each of these locations, how are the neighborhoods changing as we went along, how did we move, and we cut all these sections at all these red dots. So as an introduction, this is how we were kind of getting our heads around the corridor in general. So if you go to the next slide, Michael. In our conversation last time, we obviously began to kind of explore, well, what are the pieces of a complete street? And there's a lot of variables dimensionally and things that are included, but generally there's, sidewalk zone, some combination of parking and bike lane, ideally drive lanes, and then again, bike lane, parking, sidewalk zone. However, that can also be asymmetric, which we'll actually look at here. And we talked about that right at the end of our discussion a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was really interesting, thinking about an asymmetric street section. And the various things in there, like parklets, bike racks, what's in a sidewalk zone for shopping, walking, sitting, trees, all of those things are things we're beginning to think about. And what we've done is taken a segment of the street and kind of run a concept out in a certain way. So if you look at this diagram here, if you look at the intersection of Swanton and North Main, we took an area that is from Swanton north, a little bit past Canal.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And we looked at that.
I think it's this diagram you're looking for here, sorry.
Right, sorry. So if you take this area here, this is the red crosswalks are at the intersection of Swanton and North Main, and then moving upper right is moving north, where you hit the intersection of Canal. And I think if you remember our conversation about crosswalks, we identified this as a very long segment where you might want to introduce a crosswalk, and we actually talked about it potentially at Canal. So we took this as kind of a case study segment of North Main Street, if you will, to explore. All of it is moving toward how do we help visualize for the community what a different public realm looks like between what you've got now and what you could have with a street section that is actively putting the focus more holistically across pedestrians, biking, and cars, and not just cars, right? Which you could argue is how it is today. So if you go to the next slide, Michael. So what we did was we looked at, so this is that street segment now. The south is to the right on this diagram, north is to the left. We looked at that street segment. We located all the telephone poles for all the utility wires. And in the drawing below, which is a CAD drawing over the Google aerial, we mapped out what are the street widths in the drive lanes and in the parking areas. We located all the telephone poles, and we connected them by actually tracing where the wires go. And thank God for Google Earth, because it makes it super easy to do that, actually. So that was kind of our baseline. And then what we did next is we said, okay, if you want to introduce good, complete streets design character here, we start with, so if you go to the kind of lower right-hand side, and I want to point this out because each of these, so you take the two bump outs that are at the corner of North Main and Swanton. And even if you flip back and forth, Michael, between the image before and the image after, you can see where we've added the bump outs. And I've actually left the line work of the original curb line in there, so you can trace that in our thinking and actually know where that original curb line is. So added the bump outs on the right-hand side. They're obviously around the intersection. As you begin to move left, which is the equivalent of moving roughly north, we added one more bump out on the upper side of the street to suggest that that might be a great place to have some outdoor dining if there was a potential restaurant in that commercial building there. And then as you continue to move left and north, you'll come to the dimensions and you'll kind of see we're looking at a 10 to 11 foot drive lanes with a 3 to 4 foot shared bike lane. And we'll show an image of this a little bit closely where you see the shared bike lane with the drive lanes and what those kind of look like. There's different ways of actually striping and signaling the way those actually work. And then as you move left and you get to Canal Street, what we've done is we've taken these bump outs. And again, if you can toggle back and forth, Michael, with the previous image, you can see just how literally less daunting the amount of blacktop is between the north and south, or east and west curb, if you will, and how many visual signals there are in there to slow cars and put the preference towards pedestrians at this particular place. You might even choose to signalize it. You certainly would want to have some cautionary signs up there about giving preferential treatment to pedestrians. So this is an idea about this segment of the road here. We then took that and dumped it into a SketchUp model in 3 dimensions, and we added street trees and lamps or light posts all the way down. We got into a little bit more detail about what might be dash lines relative to bike lanes and dimensions like that, and thought a little bit about, well, where might you even have outdoor seating, benches, those kind of things. On the lower right-hand side, you see a couple of different images about shared bike lanes and how they can be striped differently to give people in cars visual cues about where there might be bikes. Because I just feel like, I think everyone would agree, that motorists really need as many visual cues as possible to remember pedestrians and bicyclists as you encounter these kind of streets. So then if you go through the next series of images, you'll see three-dimensional views of looking down the street. You've got all the bump outs that we just described, the bike lanes, the drive lanes, the parking areas that we just described, and you've got marching down the street, street trees, lighting. Lighting can also incorporate banner programs and other things that talk about seasonal events that are important to the town and all kinds of different identity there. When you get down inside it, you start to see that the scale of the street really changes when you've got trees, the lampposts and the lighting, and when you've taken out the utilities and the wires, which I know was talked about a lot last time. This is hovering over the intersection of Canal and North Main, and looking south. On the left-hand side, you'll see that there actually is a driveway in between the two bump outs. So the design gets really specific. It's a little bit awkward that this intersection has a driveway coming right into it, but these are the reality of what you got. You have to deal with it one way or another. And then what we thought was really interesting was just taking the Google image, right? The Google Street View image, and then comparing it directly to the proposal or what we've just talked about. It's not a fully articulated, fully rendered view, but you can get a sense for how different the environment is and how there's this less vast sea of asphalt at this intersection, as well as just the potential for a higher quality public realm that gets you up and down the street. So really what we did here was say, from the back of the sidewalk to the back of the sidewalk, what would the town of Winchester have real control over relative to the kind of, if you build it, hopefully they will come to develop this if you provide that great infrastructure. So this is the same plan, right, of what we just saw. The next image is a different scheme, and I'm going to ask Michael to toggle back and forth again. We're on the upside of the street. What we've done is an asymmetric design that says, if you want larger, roomier drive lanes and bike lanes, one thing you might do is decide that you don't actually need parking on every segment of the street on both sides of the street, and you might preference different sides of the street for different amounts of parking depending on how many curb cuts there are on that street that would interrupt parking anyways, depending on where the commercial uses are located. So again, in this image you can see where I left the curb line in from what is there today, and you can see on the east side, so the upside of the street, what we did is even take the curb out a little to gain a couple of extra feet of curb, and yet have full 6-foot bike lanes, 10-foot drive lanes, and then that gets mirrored across the street. We kept the bump outs on the west side of the street, which is the bottom of this drawing. And it's just another interesting way of looking at it and saying, well, do we have to go fully into a symmetrical street section as it relates to complete streets? So then we kind of ran this through the same study. And I think these images on the lower right are really great, which show a street section that is asymmetrical and has the ways that the bike lane is striped differently here and there according to what's going on in the immediate vicinity and where traffic is cutting across it, or where there potentially are conflicts or different things happening with larger areas for curb cuts and those kind of things.
Can I interject two things, John?
Absolutely.
This striping that you see in this lower right diagram, is where cars would cross over the bike lane and sort of indicating that to the biker, so that they get into a right turn lane. And you can imagine this sort of being where that you get that widening of North Main as you approach Swanton from the south, right by Molino Park there. That would be a kind of a logical place to get the bike lane perhaps inboard of turning cars. The other thing I just wanted to mention, if you don't mind, is the difference between these two schemes, besides the asymmetry of it, is you've got a fully dedicated bike lane here, a 6-foot bike lane that is not the shared bike lane that the previous scheme, really. So you can see you really want to have a minimum of 14 feet for a travel lane with a shared bike lane in it. But if you have the right of way width, or in this case, because we're doing the asymmetry, you can get the fully dedicated bike lane at 6 feet. And that gives you a nice little extra buffer for that zone between the parkers and the bikers. So you can see in some of these drawings, there's generally, you know, at least a foot of an extra buffer there, so you don't get the car door opening right against you like that. So anyway, sorry, John, carry on.
Yeah, no, I think we're getting close to the end of this. So if you scroll through the three-dimensional images, you see the quality of the streetscape here versus maybe what you have in place today. Same elements, we just kind of repeated them to try to make it apples to apples. I think this image, I think the reason we kind of went down this road, so to speak, and did this was that I think one of the things we have keyed on in dialogue with you guys from the beginning is the need to be able to visually describe to people, I guess probably on the 14th, how the street could change and how the quality of the environment could be really different with these kinds of interventions.
I mean, besides there are trade-offs, obviously, right? On the east side, you're not getting the opportunity for bump outs anymore because you don't want to. You've got a continuous bike lane up against the curb, and certainly, having the parking there in front of those potential retail leases on the east side, so you have to be careful about where you choose this kind of a section, I think. But the addition of extra crosswalks, makes that more palatable, I think. And this is the last image here. So anyway, that sort of concludes our deep thoughts for today.
Can I say something? There was a mention of the MBTA change that was suggested for bus lanes, and I don't know if we clarified that last time, but it was a new bus line, I think, from Woburn all the way to Davis Square through Winchester Center down Main Street. And so that infrastructural change is going to be a real boon, I think, to that corridor in terms of just ease of access to the Red Line from Winchester. So that's huge.
They're actually going to change something? It's not going to.
They're changing a 134 bus line from Woburn all the way through Main Street, down through Winchester Center, down Main Street, towards Medford, all the way to Davis Square. So instead of going to, the Orange Line, now there's going to be a direct bus route to the Red Line, which is huge for people going to Kendall, Harvard,
Yeah. No, I'm surprised they would consider that, considering, that's great. Because it used to be, you had to go through Medford Center to go down to Davis Square. I took that bus route a lot of times. So that's excellent. I also want to make one note on, this is the scenario you put, which I can look out my window and see exactly where you guys put it. The only thing I would suggest is that you've taken out all of the drive-by parking for Andrea's Pizza, which is on the east side of the street there. So I don't know, as an example, I think you might get some people saying, "Hey, where do I go to when I pick up my pizza? Where do I park?" But other than that, that's a.
Are you talking about Scheme 2, Diab, or Scheme 1?
Scheme 2, when you do the asymmetric.
That is the problem with doing that. I agree wholeheartedly.
Which I just want to point out. I think it's a wonderful diagram, and I think it really shows the remarkable change that could be brought about. It's just that it's one of these micro things that a lot of people know that's Andrea's, and they want to park, and that might be the first thing in their mind is, where do I park?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm definitely partial to the parking on both sides.
and I think because those little details tend to take the air out of the balloon and kind of kill conversations in an unfortunate way sometimes. I don't think we need to go in showing two concepts. I think we can show one. Look, we're not going to we're not going to design this whole corridor like a traffic engineer would for 2 weeks from today. You know, I think we're talking, I don't know that we show an asymmetric scheme in that, because I'm not sure that's the kind of minutia that you want to get into in a community meeting, but instead sort of showing what it could be as a starting point. And then, you know, there's a lot of very detailed design that has to happen there according to where are the pizza places and all those kind of things. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sally, yeah.
It seems like it's a helpful thing for us as the board to see, and it was kind of fun to see the fully fledged bike lanes as well.
So I really totally understand the idea of having dedicated bike lanes, and it might be that that is something that happens in the future, but trying to put in front of people something that is something that will fly with you know, public endorsement is really important. And I do favor more crosswalks and bump outs, and I think that doing an analysis of exactly, because it's 1 mile up and 1 mile back. It's not like we're going from, you know, Denver to LA here. That it's possible to figure out exactly where parking places can go, spaces can go. And so I think that having it on both sides is probably useful, although I did hear that you said that crosswalks make it easier to deal with parking on only one side. I don't think that business owners might agree with that. So having parking on both sides might be something that would be more palatable to our community. Even as much as I like dedicated bike lanes, because it really encourages cycling. One thing, I know that there's 5 bus stops right now on this section of Main Street, and I don't know if those were noted on any of your analyses, but as we do this actual, you know, block by block, section by section analysis, and the fact that the 134 bus, which I didn't know about I Ching, and I am thrilled to hear that.
Centered around, it's 90, it changes to a 94. So from Cambridge Road and then down Main Street across.
Well, that's just awesome. And so I want to make sure that, so the example I want to give is Mass Ave in Arlington, which is a really long stretch with a lot of really different conditions, about every 1/10 of a mile. And so being someone who drives regularly up that stretch, I know now that the lanes shift, and, you know, here it's for turning and here it's for going this way because there's going to be people turning and so on. And it was a really detailed and sensitive solution to Mass Ave in that section. And it was really well done. And I think that it might be not only possible, but necessary to be that detailed and sensitive to be really successful here. So that was my comments.
I would add that as a cyclist, I have used that detailed and sensitive bike path on Mass Ave, not only in Arlington, but also in Cambridge, through to the Tech Square. I forgot the name, but anyway, and that I found it to be, it was nice to have it there. It was nice to see that someone had taken the time to do a really good and thorough job of the bike paths.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up on Sally's point. I know that before they put in that change on Mass Ave in Arlington, there was tremendous debate in Arlington, in particular about shrinking one side of the road, taking one. So it was a hard fought design. And I want to note that Cambridge right now is in the midst of a great debate in terms of expanding their bicycle lanes and impact on businesses. So the Boston Globe is full of articles this way and that about what's happening in Cambridge. So I don't know. Whatever we do, we just have to be aware of how we bring this forward so that we get, I don't know if we'll get consensus, but at least so that we get, you know, support from the town.
Yeah, I mean, you do your best and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Avoid the red flags. So that's, you know,
I don't know how much more you have to your presentation, but I have a really
that's it.
overarching question, and I don't know if it's a question that you can offer insight into through your answer, or whether it's just something that we should put in the parking lot for the planning board to discuss. But it's the funding and the execution of totally transforming a street, including burying the power lines. It feels so big and expensive and ambitious and visionary that I just can't even imagine how it ever gets done.
Yeah, well, MassWorks has traditionally been the source for that, and it's now all underneath the one-stop umbrella for grants. So if you go to the Mass Development website, and you can look that up and see the various pots, and that's where the MassWorks grants fall now. And that's what Springfield and others are applying for. I'm certainly open to more comments, but we also could just take a second while we're pondering here and just talk a little bit about the community meeting on the 14th, and just think about, we've had 3 sets of presentations now that have gone from sort of highest level to a more specific sort of little study area here. And I imagine that we probably want to kind of have some kind of a concise preamble for that meeting to get kind of people's juices flowing and see the kinds of things we've been talking about. But I'd love to hear people's thoughts on how to structure that from your perspective.
Well, first thought I have is that I don't think that people know that complete streets are even a possibility. This section of road has, developed organically and haphazardly over 140 years or something. And I mean, even you can just tell by the power lines, it just seems like there's patches on patches on patches. So the idea that we could totally transform it, and that there's precedent and there's sort of structural premises that the whole redesign of the street is based on, is something that is sort of an education moment for our audience. And so I think that's one thing we have to talk about, and allow time for people to understand what we're proposing to do. And then be sensitive to the issues that we talked about with regards to parking and accessibility for businesses and so on. And also be sensitive to the issues that we talked about, which is impact on immediately abutting lots. That's something that a lot of people are going to care about a lot. They don't, the whole notion of sort of slowly shifting away from a car-centric society is not one that's quickly and easily embraced. And so therefore, if there's any loss of parking, or if there's any, and this is not so much on the complete streets part as on the zoning part, where we're incentivizing or we're allowing less parking. It's got to be something that we are really prepared to make the case for. So those are my thoughts. And I don't have other thoughts about number of presentations and so on. I don't have a sense of that.
Just refresh my memory, as how long is the presentation, and is John and Michael going to be there helping us, or what's the deliverable for this particular for the 14th?
Well, that's what I was sort of getting at. And I guess my assumption was it was not going to be dissimilar to the way we've done these meetings, but it would just have a larger contingent, hopefully participating and observing. So I think we want to be careful to maybe condense our, preamble a little bit to make sure we have enough time for folks to chime in, and then we could always, embellish further if there's time.
Well, I would think that part of the presentation starts with either Diab or Brian talking about the goals for North Main Street that came out of all the
Right.
different studies that have been done. And that out of those goals, we're now looking at two big things. One is zoning changes with design standards, and the other is a restoration or a renovation of the public realm. And this meeting is to talk about, I think it's mostly, is it mostly to talk about the public realm, or is it also to talk about the zoning?
That's actually the question that I would like to ask is, what is the purpose of this meeting?
Yeah.
What do we expect to get out of this meeting? Is this simply, are we presenting the work so far? Or are we going to extract more information from the people attending? So why are we doing this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we clearly want to come across as if we haven't designed anything, because we sort of haven't. We've explored a couple of different options, but and sort of identified the existing conditions and et cetera. But I mean, we came into it, I think, before we started, I think perhaps there was a thought that there's going to be a focus on zoning and design guidelines. And I think that my gut is that we sort of shifted a lot more into talking about the right of way, the public realm, and understanding that they're both going to inform each other. Mm-hmm. So I think ultimately we're going to need to get back to the zoning aspect of it, or guidelines piece of it, as we move forward. But this is really, my understanding was that this is, the culmination of this first phase of our study, and that we're basically just saying, here are the kind of things we're considering, we've been discussing, and we'd love to have your input. And this is going to launch us into our next phase of this. But I Ching, I don't know if you.
Oh, you're muted, Ching.
Got it. I think that a lot of people are, even though these have been public meetings, I don't think a lot of people have intro to this. And I think a really great way to do that would be to introduce why the board is pursuing this, right? Like, why are we doing this? How is this part of, again, the master plan, and what that means. And I think something that got lost a little bit in the CBD, the CBD project that we were reviewing, 10 Converse, was the economic impact of it. I think that in the end, sort of discussing that, very few of us had the economic impact of it sort of in hand, but to me, it felt like that portion is really important to actually for the town to understand why we're pursuing this. Much of it is to get a bigger commercial base, and much of it is to get housing, more housing, and variations in it, diversity of housing. So in some ways, I think that, Diab or Brian or whoever is going to need to do that whole big picture quickly, go through that, and then the stuff that Form in Place has done, as well as MAPC have done, put it in there. But to be honest about why we're pursuing it, right? This is a really big deal for us to better this district. It's one of the few business districts that we have. It's two of four, right? We have the CBD, we have 2 and 3, and then we have little pieces here and there. Without Holton Street right now, it's like the main way that we're going to bring a commercial district into town, or actually strengthen it. It's already here, but it's strengthening it.
So I'm seeing, because I don't think we have a lot of time left. Mm-hmm. What I'm seeing is that the main aim of this is really to open up people's minds to the possibilities, which I think encompasses what Sally was talking about, and to introduce them to what could be. And so I think if that is the framework around which we Form in Place, you folks put together your presentation in terms of, maybe an enticement of, here's an intersection which could be this great. And then we'll walk backwards and talk to you about what the existing conditions are, introduce the different elements that we can play with the right of way, the scale, all of those things that go into creating a sense of place and character. And then that would lead into what are the, those are the physical elements, and then what are the tools to bring that about? And then that might then open it up to a discussion of how people see how those different pieces play together.
Mhm. I like that.
And I would add to that we shouldn't lose sight of some of the data that was collected by MAPC about what the participants in the earlier sessions cited as their priorities, like for instance, little pocket parks or thing. I think you called them parklets. That just one that comes to mind. And I know we're not at that level of design yet, but to not ignore the input that people have already provided.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really important to capture that and incorporate that into your remarks. And then I really liked what I Ching said about focusing on the economic impact and the whole idea that if we can build a transformed street, investment in this part of town will come. And that will be a tremendous boon to the economic vitality of the whole town. And also the whole notion that this is another entryway into our town, and it will extend the downtown northward, which is not only an economic benefit to the town, but it's also a sense of place benefit, expands the sense of place of Winchester to its edges.
Mhm.
And that's something that people might not have even imagined being possible.
Yeah, that's great. So the comment you folks made about MassWorks made me, I know, Brian, we don't qualify for MassWorks, is that correct? Or do I have that wrong?
So we do qualify for
Oh, we
MassWorks.
do, okay.
We are still compliant with the housing choice legislation for this coming year because of we had our hearing with the select board and have given the information that's necessary, but it's not until next year we would not be unless we change some of our zoning to be compliant with the new law.
Yeah, so one of the things that you of course know about the housing choice thing, I'm sure.
Yep.
And so the half-mile distance from the train station is of course the magic number for that. And as you pointed out, it lands squarely in the bottom half midpoint of the North Main Street where there isn't a lot of housing right now. So tying that, one of the things we were hoping to do is in future discussions with the state is to bring in the concept that we would be introducing higher density there in order to extend that half mile up what is essentially a major what will be a much better bus corridor. So I think
Right.
that whole thing ties in at the south end is nicely.
Yep.
Great. Terrific.
Well, I'm excited. Can you just play back what or maybe you need time to synthesize, but this whole notion of what are we doing that day?
Would you like me to take a stab at that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Sorry.
No. So I mean, I have in my notes here some suggestions that Diab or Brian sort of give a preamble, talking, tying it to the master planning effort and the goals for the corridor, and then perhaps we transition by talking about the MAPC's study and some of the things that they proposed and analyzed, as well as things they heard from the community members during their outreach component. And then, Diab, you had this suggestion on sort of presenting, a vision of here's what it could be, and then stepping back and saying, here's what the existing condition is now. These are some of the variables that you would need to consider adjusting to, create a better development environment, a better placemaking, an extended public realm, those kinds of things. And then lastly, here are some of the tools for getting there. So, and I think, at that point, we probably want to give as much opportunity for folks to chime in, but does that sound right, or?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep, that's what I had. Me too. Yep.
Yeah,
I think laying out the town goals in that introduction about the economic development, I think that's really critical.
And housing.
And housing for Deb and Brian, or however you do that. I think that's a critical table setter for the whole conversation too.
Right.
I thought the outstanding visuals that you presented to us were great, and I think they'd go a long way to creating a picture for people that are hearing your presentation.
And I do think we'll augment those and kind of improve on them a little bit between now and then, to kind of tick them up a little bit, just for at least this one section of the street here and how it's visualized for people.
And my other question, and maybe it's for the planning board, is how is this being publicized?
Well,
Maybe we
So-
won't pick that up now because we're out of time, but we have to make sure we focus on that.
So it's going to be going on the main, right now, everything that related to the main website is kind of going towards the special town meeting, which is happening this Monday.
Right.
So that's taken a little bit of steam out of the room in terms of effort. So I have not been trying to bombard people because there's a lot of information related to Waterfield, another part of our agenda item this evening. So, but it's going to go on the main carousel, sent out and also flyered at the library and at town hall. Outside of that, I had not done much of anything related to flyering or like I said, everything's centered around the special town meeting.
so
Right.
we should come up, I think, so we've got 2 weeks. So what I suggest is that we have a meeting with Form in Place in a week or so, and we figure out like how much time we're going to spend on each part, the
Yes.
format in terms of, do we want to have places for discussion and questions intermingled with presentations so people don't fall asleep. And then we can talk about marketing in terms of, we can do things like sending out to town meeting members. We can, let's create a flyer with that we could send out. So I think there's work in the next week to approach those things. And if I think a little committee of the planning board, if anybody wants to do some graphic design and come up with a little flyer, that would be great. And then we could send it out probably next Tuesday, I bet, after town meeting. Hopefully
Yep.
town meeting is a one-night stand. I mean, one night stand, I was gonna say one night affair, but that's even worse.
Just one night.
Just
Okay.
one night.
Just
I
one
think
night.
it's one night,
Just
yes.
all one night.
One thing I did for the Form in Place, not Form in Place, the MAPC meetings, was that with the help of a friend, we walked the 1 mile up and the 1 mile back with flyers in hand and left them at every business and residence that we could. And I'm happy to try to squeeze that in again if we get the flyer as quickly as we can.
Are you thinking something with a visual of how it could look?
I don't know. It's just
I
mostly
think
just
that-
telling people this is coming. This is
Yeah.
happening. We're having a meeting. Come to the meeting.
Okay, yeah, maybe less is better.
Is it
Well-
Zoom?
It will be, I think it's gonna be Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are still a number of people who are uncomfortable. And any of the meeting places that we have discussed are just, there are limitations on the number of people who, we used to have all of these things at the Jenks Center. They now have a limit of 10 people there. So
Because of
Um,
COVID.
yes. So
Yes.
I
Okay,
think
good.
this is
So
going to
Zoom
be,
is great.
I think you'll get better participation. with
I think
Zoom.
we will.
yeah.
We got a lot of people turning out who might otherwise not come because they had little kids at home.
so it's just shy of 8:30. I want to make sure that John and Michael, you guys have a pretty idea of the May forward, and then Brian and I will reach out sometime next week and figure out exact details on, timing and all that sorts of that stuff, how much time we want to spend for each of those. You'll have an idea of what sort of things you want to present. I think we want to keep this to like an hour, maybe a little more.
Oh, I don't think an hour is long enough. We could say.
I don't think 4 hours is long enough, but I think I think that we need to aim for, we can't lock people in there for 2 hours.
No, I was gonna say like even an hour and 15, an hour and 20, or an hour and 30 is the most.
Why don't we aim for an hour, knowing that we will go over?
Yeah.
And because that way, you always fill the time that you think you don't have.
Right,
So,
you're right. You're right.
and then anybody who wants on the board who wants to help with the flyer, just drop Brian a line, and we'll work on that sometime next week. After
And if you guys get raw images and text together and you want some graphic help, feel free to throw it our way too. So,
Oh,
Okay, excellent.
And if you guys want to meet in a week, like you said, Diab, in an interim meeting, then Brian, if you can just connect us all and try and get that on everyone's calendar as soon as we can.
Yeah,
we'll hear from you after
Yeah.
Monday. Yeah.
yeah, it'll be fun.
are we
Okay.
meeting next Tuesday? Is the planning board scheduled to meet?
No, we are not.
So we
No,
would
I-
have to decide that quickly,
Which part would we decide quickly?
that if we're meeting with Foreman Place next week.
Oh, no, I think this would be a, just
So
the
it's
nuts
just a
and bolts.
logistics call?
It's just
Yeah.
the logistics call.
Yeah,
I don't think we
yeah.
need the whole board
Doesn't
there.
need the board,
It's-
okay,
It's
great.
just so that everyone is on the same page.
right.
Yep.
Love it. I think you guys did a great job.
Yeah.
Okay.
thank
I'm
you
really
so
psyched.
much.
Thanks. Great. We'll send the
Thanks.
PDF of that along to you, to Brian tomorrow. Then. So,
That would be excellent. And
All
thank you
right.
for putting all the trees on the street. I love all the
Thank you for
trees.
getting rid of the power lines
okay.
and for teaching me
Just
the
like
word,
that.
teaching me the word parklet.
Parklet.
There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Sally, you're making me feel like I want to get rid of the power lines in front of my house now.
Oh,
Well,
good
all you
one.
have to do is spring for the conduit going down underground. You just do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, if you have a couple extra, a couple million burning a hole in your pocket, go for it.
Just do it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Talk to you all soon.
Okay.
Thank
See
you
you
all very much.
Great, thanks so
Okay.
much.
I know.
Bye. Okay, so we now transition to something completely different. So we have special town meeting is next Monday, and the only thing on the article on the warrant is an approval by town meeting of a LDA and a ground lease. LDA, what does LDA stand for again?
Land disposition agreement.
Thank you. Land disposition agreement and the ground lease. And, oh, there he is. Hi, Rich. You've appeared. Thank you. I was waiting. I thought I would just see your name, and all of a sudden there's a face. So we have with us Rich Mucci, Chair of the Select Board. We have also with us John Sabir, Chair of the Housing Partnership Board. And we have a local resident, Zaina Marchand. So thank you all for being here. So I think that for a lot of people on this board, it's probable that the history of the Waterfield lot is shrouded in the past and is murky. So I thought I'd give a really quick overview of where this all started. And I don't have exact dates. The idea several years ago was floated by the select board to put affordable housing on the parking lot, which is right next to the center MBTA station. That's an area that had been identified for higher density units in the center business district, a couple of charrettes, and also when Dennis Carlone drew up the design guidelines and some ideas for what the center business district would look like, he put in a higher density structure. I think he had 60 or some units there, or something like that. It was just an idea. So the select board went to town meeting and asked town meeting's permission to redevelop that land for affordable housing purposes. The first step in that process was a request for qualifications, which was sent out, and we received 9 responses of people who had interest and experience in developing affordable housing. I believe that all but one were qualified. Then they went to the next stage, which was a request for proposals. We received 5 qualifying proposals. One of them did not qualify. The proposals ran the gamut from a fairly large building, very expensive building, running at around $50 million, down to buildings that were costing the mid 20 millions, a variety of levels of affordability, all of which were meeting the guidelines which were presented in the RFP. Very different architectural styles, different amounts of sustainability, different visions as to how they integrated with the town center and the neighboring communities. So 5 very different proposals. One proposal came out on top in pretty much everyone's scorecard, and that was the Civico proposal. It had the largest amount of parking. It had very integrated, sustainable design. It had a lot of great amenities for the residents. It incorporated a public plaza. So as far as I recall, that was by far the most respected and welcomed design. It went to town meeting, where town meeting approved the initial land disposition agreement. Then you may recall much more recently in past, that was challenged in a referendum in town, the town meeting vote. The referendum resulted in a essentially, how do you put it? The town meeting vote was annulled essentially, and the select board went back to further discussions with Civico, including a formation of the Waterfield Lot Task Force, 5 individuals who provided advice to the select board on a variety of issues in terms of improving the project and trying to incorporate some of the concerns that were raised in terms of parking and financial viability and financial return to the town. And so at this point, we have the results of the negotiations between the town and Civico in terms of a new land disposition agreement and a ground lease, which had not been presented to the town meeting before. So I hope I covered everything in a really short amount of time. And if you have any questions, by all means, jump in. So I think the way we might run this tonight is, so Rich Mucci obviously has much more information on the existing LDA and ground lease. So if you have any particular questions, hopefully you've all had a chance to read the acting town manager's memo on the subject, which lays out, I think, the distinctions between the old and the new proposals. So I think at this point, why don't we just, I think what we aim to get out of this meeting right tonight is a sense of where the planning board is, what statement the planning board wants to make to town meeting. This development at this site ticks all of the boxes in terms of what the planning board wants to see in the CBD, both in terms of the master plan and also previously in the terms of what the center business district zoning wanted on this site in terms of higher density. So why don't I just open up Brian, go.
Super quick, because we are not going to be meeting before town meeting. As of right now, we're not going to be meeting before town meeting. And so I just wanted to stress that the goal for this evening is to have an actual vote on the article. So not just thoughts about the potential vote, but or a potential statement. But I think the select board and others would appreciate a vote.
Yes.
Hey, Brian, I'm not sure what you're asking us to do here. I don't see any visuals or any pictures of what is being built. So what are we voting on?
So there was a lot, I guess it was in the last packet in terms of the entirety of the Waterfield proposal. So there's a revised LDA. There was and revised drawings. So we are
only for town meeting members. I don't think we got it.
It was circulated to the planning board. I
was
forwarded a
in-
copy
Yeah.
from Beth, and then Brian separately forwarded a copy of the email. It was like a week or so ago. We discussed
did-
that.
So I just texted Brian about it. I don't think, I didn't see it. Did Kurt or Nick?
I did.
No, I didn't see it. No.
I
It's in
did
the,
see it, but I don't think it was in the packet. I think it was like a separate email.
It was a separate email. It was forwarded to the board in 2 separate emails.
that,
Sally, you're on mute.
go for it, Sally.
So I am, personally, as a board member, would vote in favor of this. There's 2 points in here, and I did not go through all the legal language of the 2 major agreements because I couldn't. It would bounce off my brain cells. But I did read very closely all of the summary materials. And the 2 things that I'm curious about as to whether they would come up as requests for changes at town meeting have to do, one was with the parking, and the other, oh, I know, and it was one of the graphics that showed, it was a loading zone question. So the question that I have on the parking is, would it come up in town meeting that, because we do say in the document that the proposal provides more than the required number of parking spaces for the residences, which I guess is 1-to-1. I'm not actually sure.
It's 0.75.
It's 0.75. Okay, because we're giving, what is it, for 60 units, there's 68 spaces or something, 71 spaces residential. And whether it would happen that by the will of town meeting, the number of units of resident parking would be cut back, but that might not work if physically, in terms of where the parking spaces are located in the garages and on the site and everything, it would be too difficult to get public parking in the more enclosed space. So that was one question I had. And then the other question I had to do with this graphic here, which is, I have the feeling it's showing backwards. I don't know why, but you see the bakery truck parked in front of D'Agostino's. And my question is, will the select board work with, or just work with the merchants to make sure that loading areas for businesses around this site are timed for deliveries to not impact other parking and transit needs, because it's right near a major train station.
Sally, are
So
you
those
talking
were my
about,
only 2 questions. What?
Sally, were you talking about loading needs for the existing retailers or?
Well, I'm assuming that right now the retailer's loading, and maybe Rich, you know this, or know more about this, happens behind the buildings now?
Yeah.
Is that
They
what
do
happens?
both. It's both. They do behind the building as well as in front of the building at times as well.
Yeah,
So I think those are details.
I was just trying to anticipate things that might come up in town meeting, and I want this to go as smoothly as possible, and I want it to be approved.
I agree. I think that I'm a little concerned right now that this board hasn't fully considered everything going into this proposal. So, I mean, 3 of the members have expressed that they haven't really taken a look at it. So I'm a little concerned that we don't actually have, I don't know where we're going with this tonight. I apologize.
So DM, I have seen it. I don't know if you're counting me and the people that have not seen it.
I can, my numbers are fuzzy. So I just know that there has been.
So I saw it forwarded. I didn't realize that we were voting on it.
When did the thing go out? I'd like to look at it actually. When did it go out to us?
Yeah.
That's 5/19, May 19th.
Yeah, May 19th.
This was going to be on a previous agenda item. So, we were preparing to talk about it, and then we ended up pushing it. So we didn't resend out the documents since 5/19. Again, this is probably my mistake here. So
I'm looking at one of them. The one I have doesn't have any visuals.
the email that was sent out essentially sends you to the website, as well as has a linked PDF, which is what we're looking at now. And the website has visuals.
So yeah, the email that was sent out basically instructed everyone to this website that has all of the documents here. So the background memo, the rendering showing the new proposal, the pro forma, the Affordable Housing Trust memo, the term sheet, the whole summary, the ground lease, and as well as the notice. So you're looking at the revised version here instead of this gatehouse building. And the Chamber of Commerce building, the Gatehouse building is gone, and there is a slightly less footprint, or it's about half the footprint here, allowing for public parking along the train. The reason this happened was because the MBTA felt that that this Gatehouse building was shielding their entrance, and there was a visibility issue.
Right.
But yeah. I can go back to the PDF, which shows the major changes. But again, with Diab, it's unclear it's unclear if people are not ready to, whether or not people are ready to potentially vote in the next 20 minutes. I saw Rich had his hand up, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Rich. Go
I want
ahead,
to see what
please.
Rich has to say about that.
Jump in, Rich.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me join you tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm also happy to run through kind of the presentation we did at the town manager's hearing, if that might help.
Yeah.
Some of you just hit the highlights.
You know, the planning board meeting was going on while you were doing that, so this would be very helpful to this board.
Sure, if that's everyone.
Yeah, that'd be great. No, it's great to have you, Rich.
Can I share my screen, Diab? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you should be able to right now.
Brian has the control.
Can you see that?
Let's see. Yes, yes.
Okay. Do I need to make it bigger? Sorry, I haven't.
I think that's fine.
Right, so I'm just going to run through this quickly. I'm going to, since Diab gave a great summary of the history here, I'm going to skip over kind of the procedural history about this lot and go right to the project. But so here's the Waterfield lot overview. As I'm sure some of you know, there's the MWR sewer easement that kind of bisects the lot that comes through here, this area of the lot, which makes it a little bit tricky to deal with and building on it. But you know, this was the history that Diab was talking about. In the spring 2018 town meeting voted to restrict the land to be used for affordable housing purposes. October 2019, an RFQ was issued, as Diab mentioned. July 2020, an RFP was issued. We had 5 qualified bidders submit bids. And then the notice of award was issued to Civico in 2020. I'm going to skip that. But basically, the Waterfield Task Force that was created came up with these recommendations after the public referendum overturned what town meeting had voted on last spring. And we tried to go back to Civico over the last several months and negotiate using this as our criteria to change the project. And we pretty much addressed all of these in the new lease and the new LDA agreement. The only 3 that weren't addressed, we did not issue a new RFP. We felt that we could negotiate with Civico that issuing a new RFP would be problematic. It was risky. We were concerned about what we would get back in responses given the history of this project. So we thought, Civico was a willing partner, and we were happy to continue to negotiate with them and see what we could do to change this project as the public sentiment over the last year had dictated. Building height, there was a consideration for adding a floor to the building. We did not, in our negotiations with Civico, feel that was appropriate, partly based on some of the design comments heard from some of you as well. But We wouldn't gain any affordable housing units if we went up a floor. They would all be market rate units, and that would also, stress the parking in this area and affect the density. So we Civico and the select board felt it best not to go up a floor. And we also did not change the ground lease. That would have required us to have a new RFP issued. So we stuck with the 99-year term. However, we did change the AMI designation, which is the affordable, affordable median income. Right.
Area median income.
Area median income from 80% to 60%, which makes these units more affordable. So we did change all the units to that, maximizing the revenue possible for this project and the tax credits. We did eliminate the Chamber of Commerce building, as Brian showed, and I'll show in a second in the rendering, to allow for additional parking. We did add public parking. The initial, at this point, we're up to 71 public parking spots. And basically we're maintaining 80% of the municipal parking lot we have there now, and gaining 60 units of housing, 40 of which are affordable. We eliminated the retail and commercial space. That was essentially part of the gatehouse structure. When the gatehouse structure went away, that also went away as well. And that was a recommendation of the Waterfield Task Force. And we were able to maintain all the sustainability aspects of this project. So, we did take into consideration the good work of the Waterfield Task Force in negotiating with Civico. So as Brian pointed out, here's the updated design. It's a 4-story building, 60,000 square feet, which is a little smaller than the initial design. 40 affordable units, 20 market rate units, 119 parking spaces. I'll show you the garage in a second, but essentially it's 48 private parking spots. And Sally, as you mentioned, those are on level 2 of the parking garage. We'll have, I think it's 50 spots inside, which are at grade, and then they can go down 1 floor based on the water table, and that's where all the private parking will be, to separate the two private from public area. We also have gained these outdoor parking spots here. As you can see, this back area where I'm kind of circling here, this will be done in pavers, and it will allow us, given the flow of traffic, it will allow us to close that area off if the town wanted to have some type of festival there, or a farmer's market or something. It could be used in the future for events, and not only parking lots. So it's not just going to be your ordinary parking lot, but hopefully look a little nicer and be used for multiple purposes. Here's kind of an overview, and this, Sally, this is what you were talking about before. This just shows the how the project will be the same height as the streetscape is now in the other buildings, and then kind of flow back to the 4 stories that's proposed. In terms of loading, they are still going to have access, I believe, to the alleyway to the back. It will be tight, but certainly some of the smaller delivery trucks could get back there. Certainly it's something we could look at, Sally. It's a detail. Certainly, as these projects get finished, we're going to have to look at, parking and the roadways in that area. So, I guess the good news is we have a couple of years to consider that and study it. The bad news is we have a couple of years before anything will be done in that area. So, but certainly a comment well put that we can look at. But as you can see, the bird's eye view, you come into the main parking area this way. You can go into the garage. You can also flow out to the garage back here, and you can see how we've, kind of closed off. You can also see the sewer easement. It's a 48-inch main sewer pipe. It's pretty big, that runs underneath this lot, that goes up through here. That kind of creates a little tricky on where you can actually build. That's an MWRA sewer easement that we have to respect and maintain. The financial terms of the project, and I'll just hit, I'm not going to compare the two proposals, but basically base rent's $1 million. We have what we call payoff rent, which is something new that we negotiated, which essentially means we're getting an additional $500,000 in rent. Will be paid on equal installments up to 8% of the cash flow per year until paid in full. We estimate that this would be approximately a $40,000 payment a year guaranteed to the town in the first 14, 15 years of the lease until it's paid off. In addition, we raised the percentage rent that we get from the operating revenue from 10 to 15%, and also increased the revenue that we would get in a capital event such as a refinance from 15% to 25%. In addition, the town's affordable housing trust has agreed to loan Civico $500,000, which will be our contribution in these projects. As you may be aware, investors and lenders, the state wants to see that the town has some skin in the game. So this will be our contribution, but that is a loan that will be paid back at an interest rate of 5%. And those details, continue to need to be worked out if this project goes forward. But it is in the lease, the base term, but certainly, it's subject to mutually agreeable loan documents being drafted. We're estimating in our financial analysis over the first 15 years of the lease, which is something that we think is obtainable to estimate, an acquisition cost of $1.5 million to the town. You can see the real estate taxes at $3.1 million. The supplemental ground lease income that we're estimating would be about $380,000. The interest on the AHT loan would be about $236,000 and refinance proceeds of $466,000. So we're estimating, project revenue, a return to the town of about $5.7 million. In addition, the parking garage that will be constructed by Civico is valued at $2.2 million. The extra parking spaces outside, Civico valued those at $30,000 a space. However, if you think about it, and I don't need to tell the planning board, you know better than we do, that space is limited in the town, but to find an area to put a parking lot consistent of 30 to 50 spaces, let's say, is very difficult and challenging, especially in the center area. And then obviously the cost to construct that. So, we think that's priceless, that we're able to do this project, and maintain 80% of our municipal lot that's currently there. Right now, there's 87 parking spaces in the Waterfield lot. We're going to maintain 71 of those, which will be, to the town. They're public parking spots. We will have a say in how those spots are used. Any revenue derived from them will ultimately go back to the town. So just like we have our permit parking program now, we will figure out how we're going to use these spots as these projects get done over the next, couple of years. But total value to the town, we're estimating about $7.9 million in the first 15 years. Obviously, after the first 15 years, the town continues to get the monies I outlined in the ground lease, from the ground lease operating revenue and the refinance proceeds or any capital event. But after 15 years, it's just too speculative to say, how much ultimately we would get.
Can I ask one quick question, Rich? Which
Sure.
I did look at the materials on the website too, and I thought I saw this, but now I don't recall. Do you know what the unit mix is going to be? And sort of implicit in that is what is the burden on sort of Winchester's resources now in terms of schools and things like that from the development?
I do. I don't want to misquote it. So it's mostly 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms with a couple of 3 bedrooms. But I just want to get the exact.
That's my recollection too. I thought I did it somewhere, but I just think it's an important point just to highlight.
Sure. Sorry, I just have so many papers.
I actually have it right here.
Perfect.
Total units, 60 units, 12 a studio, 18 1-bedroom, 24 2-bedroom, and 6 3-bedrooms.
Okay.
So 40% of the units are 2 bedrooms, 30% are 1, 20% are studios, and 10% are 3 bedrooms.
Right. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks,
And then certainly you can just see that the original proposal versus the current design. Unit number is unchanged. We did change the units below 60 AMI to 40. Percentage of low income is at 67%. Obviously the parking space is the biggest change, going from 85 total parking spaces to 119, which the biggest jump is in the public parking. The gross square footage is a little smaller. You know, the financial terms that I just mentioned. I can stop sharing my screen with that unless anybody wants me to go back to a slide. And like I said, I'm happy to answer questions, explain further. The process that's kind of played out is, you know, after the Waterfield Task Force got done about October of last year, we went back and negotiated with a small team, including, you know, the town manager's office and select board members, you know, with Civico over the, you know, a few months. Came up with this, you know, agreement in principle, and then really got to work in drafting a lease and an LDA agreement that, you know, we thought, you know, incorporated, you know, all the comments that we had heard from the public. You know, that process, you know, took several weeks. And we thought it was important this time around to have those, rather than just a term sheet, but to actually have the terms out there that everyone could see and read and understand, you know, that this is the deal. And hopefully, you know, that helps people wrap their head around this project and the concept. So, you know, we've kind of landed at this point and looking forward to next Monday. So happy to answer any questions or any comments.
Chris, what is the co-working space in the front? Is that really meant just like an amenity for residents?
It is. It's really just,
Like
you
a
know,
clubhouse type space?
Yeah, like a small lounge type area, just to have some desk space if you have a meeting or something like that. I don't think it's anything major. There's also bicycle storage in the garage as well. I think you can see there's community gardens up on the roof of the garage, and you know, up on I think it's level 3 up there as well. So just some, you know, amenities that they're going to try to incorporate into the design. Certainly, obviously, this is a concept at this point. You know, certainly, you know, anything that passes town meeting obviously would come before your board as well for, you know, the real design.
Yes, just as a point of information. So who is it on the select board that works with the Civico to talk about and think about the designs that are put forward? How does that work?
So essentially, the design is really the same design that, you know, as Diab mentioned, overwhelmingly was selected, you know, in 2020. It was basically, you know, what you're seeing is what's changed is essentially the plaza has been replaced with parking, and the gatehouse has been, you know, chopped off. But other than that, the building has shifted over just a little bit, just to fit it in the lot and to make sure that, you know, that can, the entrance, you know, is accessible. But essentially, it's the same design from the previous proposal.
Originally, the previous proposal showed a pitched roof in the front. It kind of, and then the, you know, kind of the square structures were toward the back, the way it is. But I, you know, the fact that there's no, you know, no pitched roof, I'm wondering if, we're just wondering how that, you know, how that discussion happens. And,
So
you know, a lot of the guidelines for the center business district in terms of how things, you know, how the conception of how the buildings are supposed to look, you know, didn't make it in.
If I could interject here. So the design is not finalized. It's not part of this. There's certainly, it shouldn't change that much, but the design will be reviewed when it comes through the permitting process. And so it's either, if it goes through the standard permitting process, it would probably come before this board. If they decide, I don't think it's designed to go through a friendly 40B, Rich, you can correct me. If it were to go through that process, then it would go through the ZBA.
Right.
I think that if you want to look at the design criteria, you really need to go back to the original packet that Civico provided, which shows the entire palette of designs that they looked at in order to come up with this. And they did a very thorough review of architecture downtown. And it was felt by all of the boards that this actually hewed very closely to the architecture in that part of the downtown. So if you really want an idea of how they came up with this design, I think we definitely have all of their submission documents from a couple of years back. That'll give you that full understanding of where they were coming from.
Yeah, I guess I'm less concerned about justification for the existing design, but rather just the process, and who talks to whom and how that all happens. But I think that's more or less been answered. But that was my question.
Just
and then I also noticed that the thresholds for getting into the affordable apartments have been tightened. And I'm just wondering if you could expand a little on the discussion in that regard that caused the shift from the last proposal to the current.
So Rich, if I could just show what's up on the screen right now is the previous one. So there were no pitched roofs on the first one. Nothing changed in terms of the pitch. It was always a flat roof with some structures on top for solar and shade. So that didn't change. But you're right, the affordability level did change. I'll let Rich talk about that.
Thanks, Brian. So, two points. The Waterfield Task Force kind of flagged this issue during their discussions in terms of, generating revenue, tax credits for the project as well. But also from a policy standpoint, this 60% AMI family units in this town is something we're lacking. And Marty Jones actually did a great chart, and I can have it shared with you as well. But essentially, before, including River Street and the Cambridge Street projects, right now the town has 10, 60% AMI family units, and that's not including, those designated for elderly housing. As right now we have 80% AMI family units. I'm sorry, 80% AMI family units, and then we have 182 market rate units in those two projects. After this project, by changing it this way, we'll have 60% AMI family units, and we'll have 80% AMI family units. So it kind of, meets a criteria that we certainly need in this town. If we're trying to be as inclusive as possible in the affordability. I see John Sabir just popped up, and he may be able to answer a little better. But I think that was certainly from a policy standpoint something that we were looking to do, and it just so happened to make this project financially more advantageous for the town to do something like that. So I think it was a home run in both areas, and we certainly jumped on that opportunity.
Great, thank you.
John, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think Rich just touched on it. This seems counterintuitive, but lowering changing the AMI mix so that it's all at the 60% limit actually increases the funding that comes to the town, and it increases the amount of funding that they can get through something called low income housing tax credits. And that one of the questions, or one of the requests from the Waterfield Task Force was to increase the revenue to the town. Changing the 80% AMI to 60%, even though it doesn't sound logical, if you dive into the details of the low-income housing tax credit, it actually increases the revenue to the town. It also meets a housing need.
Great.
I think it probably increases the upfront revenue by providing more sources in the development budget. I would imagine long term, the 60% units will rent at a lower rent than the 80% units. So I mean, the revenue in the future tied to the payouts, the profit share over time may be lower, but
right,
by net present value basis, you're better off with.
Right, but they wouldn't be the units that residents would age gracefully and downsize into. existing residents.
So,
Probably.
yeah, I mean, a 60% AMI household unit, for a working family, for two people, it's, an income of $67,000. And for a 4-person household, it's an $84,000 income, just to give you some.
Okay.
Some
I think that there's asset limitations, I believe, too, right?
There are, yeah.
Interesting.
So can I do it? So looking at now, getting to know this current design better, it looks like the units have remained the same. The units below 60% have increased. Parking spaces for the renters remain the same or actually increased. And then the public has increased dramatically. So we've gained a lot of parking spots, lost, I guess, 7, 9, so like 16, right, from existing, but gaining a whole bunch of stuff in addition. We lost the retail space. Is it sort of a monetary issue for the retail space, or is it just that it was that gatehouse?
It was the gatehouse, really the gatehouse design. They needed to put something for the units above, the gatehouse. I think there were 3-bedroom units above it, if I remember correctly. And so they couldn't have units on the first floor, so they needed to have something. So that's why they had the commercial space there.
Okay. And then we lost the Chamber of Commerce building and it's demolished, but in the rendering, it looked like it had green space. Is that green space where the building used to be?
It's going to be parking spots at this point. It'll be that,
Okay.
that was where that pavered area is in
Okay.
the back.
Yeah.
So the paved area.
There was a little green spot here. Do you see that? Where the green behind the paver? Do you see the corner with the little gatehouse or whatever that thing is?
I think it's in the back where that one.
Isn't it-
What is that?
Isn't that the Chamber of Commerce where?
No, this is not, if you can see, if you're seeing the thing I'm seeing here, that you're talking about this green
Yeah,
space back here.
correct.
Yeah, no, that is not, that's actually not, this parcel is a gatehouse, a switch house, I don't want to be, it's a switch house. It is not owned
For the
by the
train.
town for the train.
That's MBTA property, that little box there?
Not a
Got it.
green space at all. It's just, it's going to be left open like that so that, but it is not ours, period.
Okay.
The Chamber of Commerce building was very close to where this tower was. If you
Okay.
can, if I do this, you can see that the chamber, are you seeing this, the chamber
Yep.
building there now? So yeah, it was
yeah.
right next to this glass
Oh,
tower.
okay.
That's where it was.
Okay, and there was a public space there that's now gonna be parking, but the residents will still have some public space above, like a plinth above as well as up above
So-
the workspace.
Correct. So this space, now this is in the new, this space is still here.
Yeah.
This space is still here, but it's less, and it is park. They basically responded as much as they could within their pro forma.
Right, so the project seems to have improved in some ways, and I just wonder, Ms. Mucci, if those who thought it wasn't a good deal for the town, is this now a good deal for the town?
Well, I mean, I can speak to my own experience. I mean, I was, last town meeting, I was the one select board meeting that member that voted against this. Certainly I was concerned about, the lease terms. I felt it was, a little rushed. Through this process, I certainly became, an ardent supporter of this project. And I think, to me, we're putting our municipal parking lot to work. I mean, if you think about it, you hit the nail on the head. We're losing 16 parking spots and we're gaining 60 units, 40 affordable housing units, from a policy standpoint that this town has strived to create for, almost a decade at this point on this location right next to transit. In addition, it's not costing us, we're not paying for this. I recently looked up that Civico had been awarded a project in the city of Newton to build, I think it was 43 housing units at the old Armory in West Newton. If you're familiar with that area at all, it looks like a castle. And the city of Newton's contributing $5.1 million and they're just getting the units. So to me, I think this is a home run the town of Winchester. We're going to get some financial gain from this. We're keeping our municipal parking in this area. And we're getting, from a policy standpoint, what we badly wanted in this lot, which is affordable housing units right next to mass transit. So to me, this is, certainly better. To those people out there, that were opposed to this, I guess we'll find out, on Monday, where everyone stands. But we've gotten some good feedback, to the changes. Everyone, thinks that this is a compromise. Some people are sad, certain, aspects of the project are gone. Some people are happy that certain aspects were added in. I'm a trial attorney by trade, and I settle a lot of cases. And a good settlement to me is everyone's a little upset initially, but at the end of the day, 5-10 years from now, they're happy that, at the result that happened. So to me, this is a great compromise. I think the process worked. And hopefully the voters at town meeting on Monday agree, and we can move forward to the next stage.
So Rich,
one more question. Sorry.
No,
So we lost a year with this, and Civico is still fully on board on going through with this. Is the agreement, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Like that. I mean, I'm just curious. I didn't know what the conversation was.
Yeah, I mean, so we did and we didn't lose a year. So, unfortunately, nothing can happen on this lot until the MBTA project is done and completed, at least in this area. So, they're telling us that that's a 2-year process that just started, a couple of months ago. So, we haven't, even if this had passed last year, we'd still be waiting, hurry up and waiting for the MBTA process. So, I think we're still in a good position to get, results on this lot in the timeline that we anticipated initially, even though we've taken, this process, a little, have gone down this road. But certainly, we're kind of at the mercy of the MBTA right now, and hopefully, my fingers crossed that they get that project finished in the 24 months that they've estimated.
Right, so I was looking at question 8 of your, I think this is your memo to town meeting members.
Yeah.
So question 8 was this little chart that showed when do things happen. And it looks to me, based on that, like the project would be complete within 24 months of the spring of 24, in the best case scenario where the MBTA moves down the tracks quickly or steadily on schedule. And that by the spring of 26, we would be opening housing at this location. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's the best case scenario. Civico, I think during our special meeting said that they would need 18 months to build it. We have 24 months down here.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
It could even be fall of 26. But I think spring of 26 is a reasonable estimate, if everything goes according to plan.
Right. So, Diab, should the planning board, is it appropriate or necessary or advisable or a really good idea for the planning board to vote and have a statement at this town meeting?
I think it is everything that you just said. I
Okay.
think that it is something that this board has worked for in its various forms over the years. I think I think Rich hit every single positive thing on the nail in his description of this project. So this is completely in line with everything the planning board wants. So I
Would you
really
like
think-
a motion?
I would love to have a motion.
I guess just clarify a little bit about what is our vote, who's relying on our vote, and what does it mean? I'm just feeling like having come to the party a little bit late and not really having been involved in any of this, and trying to make a decision. But Rich has certainly made a very impressive case, and to hear him speak positively is certainly helpful. But I'm still sort of feeling like I was not involved in any of the decision making on this, and so I'm just trying to figure out what is being looked for. What does our vote mean? I guess in terms of.
So at town meeting, each of the boards and committees has the option of providing their input on the articles coming before town. And in this case, and so town meeting takes those opinions and weighs them against all of the other things that are presented and their own concerns. And one hopes that if a board has expertise in an area and is trusted in an area, that their statement will, provide some guidance for town meeting members. So this particular project falls squarely in this board's purview, regardless of, most of the people on this board were obviously not around. So you sort of have to, coming up to speed is unfortunate. And in your case, you're really coming up to speed quickly since you've only been on the board a couple months. But so the question is, do the benefits of this project fall in line with the vision the planning board has in terms of, as that expressed by the master plan, which is increased affordable housing, reinvigorating our downtown, providing public places for public discourse or gathering, sustainability. All of those things are things that is part of the planning board's vision through the master plan. And also when the Center Business District was rezoned, I think it was 10 years ago, something like that. This was envisioned as an area which would get higher density residential development. And so the question is, does this board feel that this is an appropriate use for this property? And does this and how does it fulfill our goals? And so if we were to make a statement to that effect and present it to town meeting, then the hope would be the town meeting would take that into consideration and vote the way that we hope they would.
So our statement would state our recommendation with regards to favorable action. I think,
we would
and
recommend favorable action.
Yeah, and then, but would it also say why in 2 or 3 or 4 bullets?
Yes, it would. We would always want to give some reason why we voted favorable action.
So let us see if we can come up with those, say, 4 bullets. And I would say one of them is that it supports the vision of the town center that is articulated in our master plan and in our Center Business District. And I would say that it also moves the needle on our commitment to affordable housing and our statutory obligation to affordable housing if we want to be eligible for other things forward significantly. And then some of the like the amenity space, like the outdoor flexible parking space gathering and so on. But I don't know if that's worthy of a bullet point or if it's just primarily the 2 that I just started with.
I think we could also put in that it will be a boon to economic, I don't know what the word is, vitality.
Vitality?
Yeah, it increases the economic vitality of the downtown.
Just to gather, I guess what's been thrown out here. I think the first bullet point of a potential vote would be that it's in line with the master plan, the Center Business District rezoning, as well as the housing production plan.
Yes.
That would be kind of a one bite. The next bite could be talk about economic vitality. And then you could go into how the revised LDA is better or, you know, or worse, or I mean, whatever you think. I mean, for whatever it means, I believe that we had a reasonably good deal before, and I think that the deal has gotten better. That's my personal opinion. I think there should be some type of something acknowledging that this is, if you believe it, if it is better for town. It's not really a deal. I wouldn't even say it's a better deal. It's just it's better for town. We're getting more parking. The way that you can determine whether or not we're getting a better deal. It's hard. Some people it's hard when people don't value certain things.
So why don't we call it a better outcome rather than a better deal?
Well, you can talk about what kind of outcome. I think it's a better financial outcome for the town. It seems to be anyway, at least in my analysis, again, not being an expert on financial return from long-term real estate in projects.
Well, we steered away from that stuff because we don't have expertise in it. So.
Okay, so we don't have to say that then. But certainly in terms of the sort of the livability and character and appeal of our downtown, I would say that the proposal advances those.
So that it references the 3 plans, economic vitality.
I think we do have to say something about the affordable units. I know it's covered in one, but it's a very important point.
Well, and I particularly like that it was actually financially beneficial to the entire proposal to bring it to 66% at 60% AMI, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Rich?
It's a deeper affordability restriction.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
So the new plan, I like what you just said about deeper affordability, Kurt.
Yeah, I missed.
Provides deeper affordability.
Yes. And I mean, I particularly like the flexible open space for the paved area where upon a permit from the select board, that area can be reserved for public gatherings that could flow over from the common or whatever. I mean, it just anything that gets people together outside is a good thing.
So do we want to call that communal use? How do we?
I'd say improved site plan for public gathering.
Shared use.
Or shared use for more programming.
Yeah, it's a programmable
shared
space.
Use. I wouldn't use the word improved, but I would say, I think it.
It includes a flexible programmable space for community use.
Oh,
outside.
Nice. Includes a
grade.
Flexible programmable space.
For community use at grade.
And
also, this is another bullet before I lose it, and because we're running out of time, the sustainability stuff.
It maintains the level of sustainability.
It's all electric building. It's got solar on the roof. What else?
It's got, I think it's got gray water systems.
Okay.
It's got all sorts of stuff, at least if it's
passive. It's actually passive.
Well,
house.
it's also transit oriented. I mean, I feel like that's the biggest push.
Yes.
Big
transit oriented housing. Transit oriented housing.
Transit oriented housing.
Good one.
You can't get more transit oriented than that. Unless you stepped out of your front door directly into the train. Okay, so we have, so what I will do is I will listen to this tape to make sure I get all of these elements. So I'm not going to read them all out because I don't have them, but the motion, as I believe I have it, is to recommend favorable action on this article. It is in line with the master plan, the CBD rezoning, the housing production plan. It increases the economic vitality of the center business district. The new plan provides a deeper level of affordability. It includes a flexible, programmable space for community use. provides a transit-oriented housing and retains all of the sustainable elements, which include all electric, passive, gray water, I believe.
I would also add that even though we know that the detailing of the design is not done, the proposal to keep the Waterfield's road, is it road or street, facade at 3 stories is a respectful benchmark. It aligns with the building that's immediately uphill from it, or not. I loved it. I mean, obviously, I don't think the roofs align because it is uphill, but you know, it's the same building height, and that helps preserve the openness of the town common.
So it maintains the scale of the existing buildings on Waterfield.
Yeah, and facing the common.
And the open relationship to the town common.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that hopefully that when this thing comes before permitting, that the design, all of the good elements of the design retain, but as we know, once this goes through an actual permitting process, things may change. So that's just the way of things. So I have those are now 7 points. So much for 4 bullets. We now have 7. And so if that is the motion,
so moved.
Then is there a second?
Second.
Great, Kurt seconds. So roll call vote, please.
And can I just add that if Nick really doesn't feel that he's eligible or knowledgeable enough to vote, can he abstain?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I just wanted to. I'm sorry to.
I'm sort of thinking that I want to support my fellow board members. It doesn't feel like enough time for me personally. You know, having joined within the last few months. Would an abstention be an acceptable, I guess, position?
You need to vote your conscience, Nick. If you don't feel like this is something you can support, then.
Well, no, I
mean that in a technical sense.
What's that?
I mean that in a technical sense, not in a philosophical sense.
Right.
Yeah, abstaining is a very neutral event.
There's no value, I think, placed on an abstention. So that's right.
That's right.
And I can certainly point out that, you know, if it makes you more comfortable, when I read this to town meeting, I can say that it was an abstention from a board member a recently elected board member. Who?
That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I've abstained from a vote that went in front of town meeting, and that was the reason I abstained from capital planning, because I had no clue. So it was
right. Well, that's how I feel. You know.
Yeah. So that's I think we can continue. We can continue with or start the vote. So why don't I go in the order of my screen? I Ching.
Aye.
Sally.
Aye.
Kurt.
Aye.
Nick.
Steen.
And Dieb says aye. So we are 4-0-1 abstention. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rich, for dropping by. That was really, really helpful.
Your memo was very helpful.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know it's very positive. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, if you have any questions offline, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions. I've been, living this project for several months now. So
my favorite paragraph in the memo is the first several lines of the question number 4. So you can just.
I don't even remember question 4. It's all.
Question 4 was, why is the financial return not greater? And it goes on about, if a municipality's demands are too great too soon, no lender or investor will finance the project. It's a balancing act of revenue and capital.
Yeah.
I thought it was really a good explanation. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Sure you wrote the whole thing.
Appreciate
and applicable to multiple projects that come in front of the board.
Yeah. We're trying to move things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Speaking of which, I would suggest we move for adjournment.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Oh, okay. I think I'll take that as a first and a second. Roll call vote. Kurt,
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
Sally,
Aye.
I Ching.
Aye.
I say aye as well. Thank you to, thanks to our town planner, Brian Kelly. Thank you, WinCam. Thank
And
you
bye,
to-
Zena.
Bye, Zena. Thanks to our assistant town engineer, Brian Manter, who joined us for a while. Thank you, Brian, I don't know why you joined our meetings. It must be fascinating. And thanks out to everyone in the WinCam
Yep.
land. And some of us will see you at town meeting on next Tuesday. And we'll see
No.
everyone else 2 weeks
No.
from today.
Isn't it
Next
Monday?
Monday.
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 No,
I
no planning
apologize.
board Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay, no planning board Tuesday. Have a good
Have a good
evening,
night.
everyone.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks.